Hey everybody, welcome to the Bible Themes Notes for today. Hope you're doing well, and let's get right to it for our notes on Solomon. We begin with the establishment of Solomon's reign. Solomon was appointed by David. And after he was king, God asked him for anything that he wanted, and Solomon wisely requested wisdom and discernment to be a good king over his people. So establishment of Solomon's reign, appointed by David, and request for wisdom. Now, before we move on, I just have to tell you a little odd story in 1 Kings chapter 1. Most of you have not heard of this story before. Now, David was very old in 1 Kings 1, and he was also very cold. So I'm going to put little shivering marks next to him. Now, they could not warm the king. And so somebody had the bright idea of having a beauty contest in the kingdom, and the young woman that would win the contest would be the personal attendant to the king, and she would also be simply the king's body warmer. When he got too cold, she would warm him up. And her name was Abishag. Yeah, don't do that. Okay, there we are. And her name was Abishag. So we have Abishag here, and we have King David. So, interesting story. Many years ago, when we got computer passwords at school, and the computer passwords were not complicated, my computer password was Abishag, and this I did not pick. It was given to me, just kind of odd. Anyway, David has his official body warmer. Next, what happens is his son, Adonijah, wants to be king, and he is the oldest son at this point. However, he does not talk to his dad about this. He talks to other advisors, and off-site, outside of Jerusalem, they crown him as the next king of Israel. Well, word gets back to David, and David's most loyal advisors say, "Did you approve this for Adonijah to become king?" And David said, "No, I've not approved this." And so David then crowns his son Solomon to become king. And when Solomon becomes king, Adonijah backs off and says, "Okay, I'll follow Dad, and I will not become king. And I will not be king." So now is the king. Now, how this this part of the story ends is that Solomon then becomes king, and this is Solomon right here. Solomon becomes king, and David ends up dying because he was very old. So David is no longer in the picture. One day, Adonijah, in the palace, he sees this young, beautiful woman who was a virgin. Interestingly, the Bible says that David and Adonijah never had sex, even though she was the body warmer. So Adonijah is thinking, "Hey, I'd like to marry this eligible female in the palace." So Adonijah goes to Bathsheba, this is Solomon's mom, and says, "Hey, could I marry Abishag?" So Bathsheba goes to Solomon and says, "Can your brother Adonijah have Abishag?" And Solomon says, "Oh, well, if Adonijah wants something that our father used to have, and if he gets her, what else is he going to want? Like maybe the kingship." So Solomon orders Adonijah's death. And there we go. Now, the Bible says that Solomon grew very wise, and just want to highlight that God gave Solomon wisdom, very great insight. It was greater than the wisdom of other well-known people. He also was very wise with his proverbs. He was something of a musician, wrote songs, and I like to point out that he was also a biological genius. He knew about plants, from trees to small plants, and also animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. So kind of interesting, Solomon's wisdom, musical ability, and biology smarts. Now, the glory of Solomon's reign. This is a cutout of what Solomon's temple might have looked like. One of the most impressive buildings in the ancient world at that time, with the size and the beauty and the amount of gold that is used. When Solomon dedicated the temple, I just show you this because this is amazing. This is a true spiritual high point in the Old Testament. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and sacrifices. The glory of the Lord filled the temple. People could see God's presence. And when people saw this, they knelt on the pavement with their faces to the ground and worshiped. He is good. His love endures forever. So the glory of Solomon's reign. First, the construction of the temple. It took about 7 years. Construction of temple. And construction of the palace. And the palace took about 13 years. Even though the palace took longer, I have the temple, the word temple in all caps and underlined, and so highlight that, asterisk that, because that was the most important building project, because this actually was God's presence among his people in the temple. Glory of Solomon's reign. Also, we have God's covenant with Solomon. God's covenant with Solomon. And notice it is a suzerain vassal covenant, meaning it's conditional. I'll show you that in just a moment. So Solomon, suzerain vassal. God's covenant with Solomon, suzerain vassal, conditional covenant. And then Solomon's power and wealth. At this time in the ancient world, Solomon's power and wealth was unmatched. This was truly the golden age for the Israelite kingdom, God's people. Here we have the Lord appearing to Solomon. This is after the temple was built. And I just want to show you that right here, if you walk before me, but if, just to show you, this is a suzerain vassal covenant. And part of the point here is Solomon was so strong militarily and monetarily with his wealth, it looked as if nothing could ever come against Israel. But God said, no, things can come against Israel. More importantly, you need to follow me. This has to do with Solomon's wealth. The gold Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, kind of an interesting number there. But let's just take a look at that for a moment. We've got we have the price of gold today. This is what I want to do. Today, the price of gold is $1,657 an ounce, times 16 ounces in a pound. And 666 talents is 25 tons. So that's how many the worth of a pound of gold today, times 2,000 pounds are in a ton, and that number of talents is actually 25 tons. So here we have over $1 billion. And that billion was yearly, and it didn't include anything else. So Solomon was a billion upon billion upon billionaire. In fact, the Bible says Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. And then we come to the decline of Solomon, foreign wives and adversaries. The decline of Solomon, foreign wives and adversaries. The reason why foreign wives were wrong is because they, and this just happened in that culture, necessarily would bring their idols into Jerusalem. So he was introducing or allowing, shall we say, idol worship in Jerusalem. Near the end of his reign, because of his unfaithfulness, there was more fighting along the fringes of his empire. So an interesting and very odd fact about Solomon, the Bible says he, however, loved many foreign women. God said, you must not intermarry with them. And why? Because they will turn your hearts after their gods. And here is the weird thing. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, women that he slept with but did not have the status of wife. So he had 1,000 women in his harem. Enough said. Now, Solomon, before all the bad stuff at the end of his reign, did write the book of Proverbs, and it is a book of wisdom for the ancient world, but also it is wisdom for us today. The point of the book is to be very practical, not to give theological, great theological principles or ideas, but, how do you live life? So the book of Proverbs, and this is going to lead into your assignment that you're going to do. Let me back up. A proverb is a clever short saying. So most of the book is filled with one-line verses that are independent of each other, and they're just clever. Now, we lose a lot of the cleverness because of the cultural difference and the language translation. So, for instance, here is a clever saying. It's not in the Bible, of course. The only place to find work, back up, redo. The only place to find success before work is in the dictionary. The only place to find success before work is in the dictionary. Because usually you have to work hard in order to have sex. Work hard in order to have success. Work hard in order to have success. But the dictionary lists success before work. Do you get the cleverness of this? Now, in the Spanish language, this still works, but if you translated this into another language where the word order is different, then it won't be clever. Also, Proverbs are generalizations. They are not absolute truths. So if there is something in a proverb that you can find an exception to, this does not mean that the Bible is false. These are just generalized sayings. That is the type of literature. And also very practical. If you don't apply Proverbs to your life, you are missing the point. It is practical. So Proverbs 1 through 9 are basically, it's more of a discourse about wisdom and following lady wisdom and rejecting lady folly. So it's these two women, and who are you going to follow? But then Proverbs 10 to 31, for most of this portion of Proverbs, it is just filled with one verse or one proverb statements for chapter after chapter after chapter. So what I would like you to do is read or skim through Proverbs 10, 11, and 12. And if you just look at chapter 10, that's fine, or 11 or 12, or some from all three. And I'd like you to pick 5 verses that stand out to you, particularly 5 verses that are very applicable to high school life. And for each verse, write specifically 3 or more sentences, how it relates to high school life. Even make up a story. So be very specific. Don't use any real names, but make up a little story in 3 sentences on how to relate this to high school life. And in so doing, you will be getting the point of the practicality of Proverbs. So, friends, I hope you enjoyed this presentation today. Hope you have a good day, and we'll talk to you next time. See you later. Bye-bye.